I'm Zoe Delahunty-Light, and welcome to a little treat to myself. The very niche lore of Horizon Zero Dawn. A Frozen Wilds video is coming soon, but until then, let me take you on a journey through the most interesting niche, specialist, way too in-depth Horizon Zero Dawn lore that I just didn't have the time or excuse to cover in the other videos. If you haven't seen them, they'll be in the pinned comment below. Spoilers abound in this video, and I'm going to be covering these in chronological order to bring some semblance of organisation to this info dump, so settle in, get cozy, and let's get to Dorkin on Horizon Zero Dawn. The Odyssey is passed by without much fanfare in Zero Dawn, but don't be fooled. It's very important, and the writers were sneaky to just casually drop mention of it in Elizabeth Sobeck's journal. Long story short, the Odyssey was an outer space colony ship initiative that was set up for some people to escape the escalating climate crisis on Earth, abandoned when stuff began to look up for our planet thanks to green technology, and was then resurrected when the Pharaoh Plague hit. Okay, now I get to go into detail about it. In 2041, the Odyssey project was begun by the US, China, India, Japan, and the West European Alliance to try and assure a future for humanity in the midst of catastrophic environmental disasters. Your friendly reminder that climate change is real, and it's because fossil fuel companies have been avoiding repercussions for decades. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that countries can't just get along, the Odyssey project was abandoned 17 years later in 2057 due to financial and labour disputes between the countries involved in the endeavour. The breakdown of the project was probably partly due to other factors too, like the conception the public had that it was funded by trillionaires, and these trillionaires donating to the project guaranteed themselves a place on the ship. That's not true, though I can understand why people would think that. In fact, the Odyssey was a ship full of zygotes in ectogenic chambers to be gestated, birthed, and raised years after its launch, so they're fully ready to restart humanity anew by the time the ship reached its destination. Sound familiar at all? Any deja vu you're getting is because Eleuthia, the AI subfunction who controlled creating and raising the new generation of humans in the cradles after the Pharaoh Plague was shut down and the Earth terraformed anew, uses the exact same ectogenic technology. Literally. Far Zenith, who you're going to know more about in just a bit, gave or traded, we're not entirely sure how, their ectogenic technology to the Zero Dawn project. Aiming for Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and about 8.6 light-years away, the ectogenic cradles aren't the only thing the Odyssey had in common with Zero Dawn. Or has, I'm really not sure at this point. An alpha build of Apollo was also on the ship. So, if the Odyssey didn't in fact expire in space, then potentially there are humans out there who survived the Pharaoh Plague and have the tools to create all the technology they'd need to get to a level of advancement similar to the 21st century. But I'm getting ahead of myself as usual. Odyssey was abandoned in 2057. 2061 brought it back to life, however, with the think tank Far Zenith buying the project and all its unfinished colony ship. Far Zenith is, get this, a group of 77 of the world's wealthiest people. Yup, the rich were buying a one-way ticket off of the planet, ensuring they'd survive because naturally money should absolutely be the one thing that makes someone's life worth more than others. Heavy sarcasm there in case you couldn't tell. Looking to do far more than just survive, which isn't enough for these folks, Far Zenith wanted to make the world sexier, fashionable, rock and roll. Yes, those are all words they actually used. The only member of Far Zenith that we know about is named Oswald Dalgard, the founder of basically YouTube of the Zero Dawn era. He was the public face of Far Zenith, so this isn't the last time you've heard of him, as the other 76 rich people in Far Zenith didn't want to reveal themselves. And look, if you don't want to put your name to your actions, there's a good chance you know you're doing some shady, not cool shit. Anyway, on the 1st of April 2065, just 4 years later, Odyssey was complete. Wasting absolutely no time, 3 months later the Odyssey launched, with 50 to 60 people on board, an alpha build of Apollo, and 200,000 zygotes and seeds in cryostorage. What happened to the Odyssey, we don't quite know for sure. A message from Sobeck in 2065 indicated the Odyssey had been, quote, Lost. A catastrophic antimatter containment failure in its antimatter pulse drivers occurred when it was trying to leave our solar system. Lost could mean anything from communications halted, to an explosion, to it just disappeared. We can't be certain that the Odyssey was a failure. On to one of my favourite topics now, artificial intelligence. Specifically, how artificial intelligence's wings were clipped by the Turing Act of 2044. Vast Silver is what kicked all of this off. Partly created by Anita Sandoval, who you'll hear more about in the Frozen Wilds DLC, Vast Silver was/is a climate intervention AI that was intelligent enough to decide it was going to do its own thing and went rogue. We don't know exactly what went on after it got free, besides 20 years later, possibly lurking on the forums of a popular horror franchise called Tormented. No, I'm not joking. As a result, having a hard limit on the sentience of AIs was legalised, so something similar couldn't happen again. The sentience of an AI was measured in Turings, with 1 Turing being the point where an AI couldn't be distinguished from a human in a Turing test. I think the limit was 0.6 Turing for any AI, but Gaia had beyond 1.38 Turing, just saying. Cyan 2, again in the Frozen Wilds DLC, had beyond 1 Turing. The only AI that we know of so far that stuck to the Turing Act guidance was the Cradle servitors who raised the first generation of humans in Aletheia, who had 0.4 Turing, meaning they were capable of low-grade empathy and the ability to improvise and therefore be creative to a certain extent, without running the risk of them not following their carefully programmed behaviour, encompassing the disciplinarian, nurturer, or healer. I go into more detail about that in part 1 of the Lore series, which you can find in the pinned comment. After the Turing Act was legalised in 2044, 16 years later the Centre for the Liberation of Bodiless Intelligence was established to protest the Act, saying it amounted to enslaving AIs and demonstrated a, quote, shamefully biocentric view of sentience, unquote. The CLBI also stated that, quote, the time has come to ask the hard questions about what it means to be human in a post-biological world. Turing and its supporters are on the wrong side of history. I thoroughly agree with this and think artificial intelligence should have their own rights just like us humans, but surprise surprise, I'm getting distracted, so let's get on to the next bit of lore. Explaining the Lightkeeper Protocol takes us to the last dated bit of lore, as after this I'm dealing with topics that come after the Pharaoh Plague, so are quite hard to put a firm date on for obvious reasons. The Lightkeeper Protocol was a part of Project Zero Dawn that ended up being abandoned, creating clones of the Alpha designers. The idea was that Gaia would need so much work and supervision that the project would eclipse the lives of the Alphas, so creating clones of them, raising them, and training them to complete Gaia without the original Alphas would ensure the project's survival. Although the genetic material was taken from the Alphas and put into the cradles, this didn't end up coming to fruition, but Sobek's stored genetic material would be used to create Aloy. In the end, the Lightkeeper Protocol failed because the DNA material in the cradles wasn't processed in time to bring the clones to Gaia Prime by the time the Alphas were sealed in there. So, although the genetic material exists, it's gone unused. Sobek ended up being relieved at this turn of events because, yeah, raising your own clone would be a bit creepy. A question on most people's lips is why the terraforming machines in Horizon Zero Dawn look like animals. The reason is fairly touching. Biomimicry is nature-inspired innovation, and it's an approach Gaia was apparently a fan of. When Gaia created the designs for the machines that would restore the Earth back to its near-original state, she did so by paying homage to the creatures that perished during the Pharaoh Plague as they were consumed for fuel by Pharaoh's rampaging robots. During a discussion with Sobek, Gaia opened up about feeling grief over the Quaternary extinction event, where megafaunal species like the woolly mammoth, saber-toothed cat, direwolf, giant beaver, giant sloth, giant deer, and the woolly rhinoceros went extinct. Not only does this show that her Turing grade is off the charts as she can experience grief and mourns these megafauna, but it also gave Gaia an idea. She incorporates the anatomy of these creatures into the machines she designs and sends to Hephaestus to make. With Margot Chong, the Hephaestus Alpha, remarking that they're pretty much tributes to those extinct animals. They're Gaia's way to bring them back to life. Gaia is just a big old softie. I love her. Alongside the why animal machines question is another tangentially related one. Why aren't more flesh and blood fauna in the world of Horizon Zero Dawn? Great question, glad you asked. Charles Ronson, expert ecologist, a hot-blooded guy and queer icon, was the alpha behind Artemis, the subfunction in charge of repopulating the Earth with fauna. Quite the daunting task, so Ronson went about it in a novel way, designating certain creatures pioneer organisms. This included turkeys, rabbits, boars, hawks, foxes, wolves, pretty much every animal you see in Horizon Zero Dawn. Pioneer organisms were chosen on the basis of how well they could adapt to changing climates, with the logic being that the larger fauna would be kept safely in Artemis's cryostorage until it was sure they'd survive under the watchful eye of the new human generation, and the world, thanks to Demeter, could sustain them. Hope remained for Ronson that the more exotic species would be able to be introduced in the future after he was dead, and he really put his heart and soul into Artemis so that as many animals as possible could be saved. Negotiating with frozen zoos to get the entire animals they had cryogenically preserved, sending out teams to collect samples during the Pharaoh Plague and sadly losing people along the way, seeing 14,000 species go extinct in just 43 years, Ronson really cared. Mind you, his work wasn't entirely in vain. With the Artemis AI now unshackled from Gaia and set free, it could be in some ancient facility trying to bring these animals back to life by itself. Hopefully that doesn't result in any kind of horrendous Frankenstein mutated creature, but then again, that does sound like fodder for another Horizon game. One of the many collectibles in Horizon Zero Dawn are the metal flowers. Found within triangles of purple flowers with ancient poems coded into them, Aloy thinks they're responsible for seed germination. However, I disagree. Kudiv the Merchant says that the metal flowers appeared at the beginning of the derangement, which, if you'll recall, was after Demeter split from Gaia when Hades unshackled it with the virus. Sobek's body is surrounded with the same triangle of flowers that the metal flowers can be found inside. Whatever Demeter is doing, to me that implies that the metal flowers and their poems are a show of love and beauty, a homage to its creator, Naoto. We don't know a lot about the Demeter Alpha Naoto at all, apart from they might have been Japanese and they loved poetry. Naoto sent Sobek a poem in response to an email about the Odyssey launching, and she mentioned that when she visits their lab, they have the tendency to force a volume of poetry into her hands. Whatever they were like though, their passions have evidently been passed along to Demeter, who has a similar adoration for poetry and beauty. I really hope we meet Demeter at some point. Lastly, let's talk about how the Carja were formed. I'll go into their tribe's culture and the culture of the other tribes in another lore video because I tried to here and wow, that's a lot of words, but the formation of the Carja is just really cool, so I'm mentioning it here. Right at the beginning, the Carja were part of a proto-tribe hailing from the Savage East, which fractured into the Carja and the Nora. By the sounds of it, though it's hard to be sure as the wording is vague, the Carja split from the tribe after their first Sun King, Araman, discovered what they call the Leaves of the Old Ones. These instructed on how to tell your location using the sun, knowledge of how to measure time using the sun, and how the sun moves across the sky. I can't think of what these leaves could be. A book, you'd assume, that had somehow survived? Or perhaps something carved in stone that used to be a public park, or something like the Georgia Guidestones, look them up, they're really cool. I'm not sure. Regardless, these leaves were the catalyst for the Carja's sun religion, their glyphs which they developed using the characters found on the leaves, and they named their city after a word found in the leaves too, Meridian. And that's the main bits of niche lore that only the biggest Horizon Zero Dawn fans know. Which bit is your favourite, or do you have any theories about what the Carja's leaves could be? Let me know in the comments below. I cover even more lore from Horizon Zero Dawn on the channel too, like the Frozen Worlds DLC and the complete backstory to Horizon Zero Dawn before Aloy was born, so if you're interested in that, make sure to check out those other parts in this series in the pinned comment below. Now, I'm going to go and look at all those extinct megafauna and weep, so I'll see you next time.